Hello, it's Thursday. We are rolling through week one of this relaunch. Today's topic, the Nebraska pipeline.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To a Thursday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. $150 win or lose. Head to FanDuel.com/locked on to get started.
Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, this is the day that we've been waiting for. Everybody's been waiting for. Everybody loves a little good offensive line talk, Mitch. And the thing is, I mean, they once again, they have a lot of pieces back. They have a coach who's now got some praise that's hyped onto the top of them. Like it feels like things are pretty good in that room. And a lot of times you know that by the idea that nobody's really talked about him all that much yet. And I think that's a good thing. At least it's not a big question mark this time around as it usually is in the spring.
It seems that it's been a huge question for the last few years. And Nebraska's got an offensive line coach going into his third season, which seems foreign to the way that Nebraska football has operated in recent years. Donovan Raiola, of course, I'm talking about, back for year two under Matt Rhule, and I, dare we say that the retention of Donovan Raiola, the decision that Matt Rhule made in his opening weeks in the winter of 2022, was one of the best decisions that he's made in his time with Nebraska?
I wonder about that. Like, I think the thing that makes Matt Rhule special is that I think there's a lot of types of personalities and a lot of types of coaches who could have success under him. But it definitely, for whatever reason, seems to be a good fit. Rhule talked about that way at the beginning when the idea that he was going to retain him was sort of coming to the forefront. The style of coaching that he comes from, the Harry Hested school, and kind of what he's all about on the offensive line. It just fit with his personality, and it fit with how he wants to coach on the offensive line. So it just made sense to retain him. But man, it does feel like there's some really, like, you've stacked a year on top of a year, and you have some guys who are now coming back. It might be up there, Mitch. Like a year ago, right now, we were still convincing people or trying to convince people, or people were unconvinced about the idea that Donovan Raiola should even be in the program. What did he kind of deserve to, what did he do to deserve to be here after his first year, after Scott Frost got fired? And he seemed like a lame duck coach, and now a year has gone on, and the offensive line wasn't a gigantic problem last year, and I feel like that was a step in the right direction at the very least.
And a year ago, he was the coach who couldn't get his nephew to commit to Nebraska as a top recruit. He was committed to he was on the way to committing to Georgia. He was uncommitted a year ago, and I think there were a lot of people who it was difficult to convince, to kind of pick up on where you were going. It was difficult to convince people that Matt Rhule hired Donovan for anything other than the fact that he was the uncle of the number one high school recruit in the country. And, Rhule laid it out early in his time at Nebraska. He talked about how Marcus Satterfield urged him to keep Donovan, and said, what are you waiting for? Because he went through kind of this trial period in that first December where Donovan just kept coming to work, and Rhule would see him and he would say, oh, there's a guy right there that I have not hired, but he's continuing to just kind of be here. And obviously it was an audition, and they figured out very fast, or at least over a couple of weeks, that Raiola's style as an O-line coach, like you mentioned, it meshed with Matt Rhule. And I think I learned something about Rhule in that time, and kind of the way that he evaluates coaches through that. And also his decision to get Tony White. I mean, we talk about the best
Yes.
moves that Matt Rhule made. I mean, obviously Tony White, and picking Tony White from Syracuse was a pretty big one too.
What do you think it is about Donovan Raiola that it has allowed him, or is it just about the offense and the setup of it in general? With that being said, Mitch, I mean, the offense, Nebraska's offense was quite bad last year. I'm sure people remember that. They did some good things on the ground, but now we're looking at and usually if the offense isn't good, you look at the offensive line and you say, hey, it's time to make a change there. It's the way it's always been around here, but that is certainly not the case. Like, what is it about him that's allowed him to have that success, even from a place where he came from with the fan base, where he certainly wasn't in good favor after a year of being here?
Well, I some of it has to do with Dylan. Some of it has to do with the fact that they turned it around there and they ended up landing Dylan, and Nebraska was playing the long game apparently with Dylan Raiola all the way, and it worked. I also just think it has to do with his personality. Donovan and the offensive line, they did open some holes. I think it was fairly easy to see that despite the struggles of the offense, that the offensive line was something of a bright spot for Nebraska last year. The Huskers ran the ball pretty well. I mean, protection could have been better at times, but really it's hard to put all of that on the O-line. Some years you see the offense struggle and you can point the finger at the O-line and say, man, they were bad. I think last year people did that more at the quarterbacks, and recognized that the wide receivers were just beat up for almost the entire season. It wasn't really on the O-line. And again, I'll get back to his personality. A lot of it has to do with that too. He is a lot different than Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule could stand and give a sermon.
Yeah.
I say a sermon, and that's there's some accuracy there. His father is in the clergy.
Rhule's comfortable in any room,
right?
He's
And Donovan's not. Donovan's comfortable yelling at his guys in practice, and and like yelling at them in a teaching kind of way. It's not like he's this ruthless screamer who doesn't get his message across. He gets his message across. They hear him. They love him. To me, that's what it is. I just kind of talked myself into it. That's what it is, because you heard it from the offensive linemen whenever they talked about their group. They love Donovan Raiola. They love playing for him. And I think Nebraska fans picked up on that, and he's kind of endeared himself to the Huskers in that way.
I tell you what I think it is, and this will actually lead perfectly into our next segment here when we talk about some of the guys. Like, I think out of a position coach, especially in a year like that for Nebraska, where you didn't make a bowl game and it seems lost to a certain degree, what you want to see is just guys get better. And that happened for a lot of people on the offensive line and guys who have been here for years. I'll use one guy specifically, and he's a guy that's going to come up in the next segment. Bryce Benhart. I mean, he was just a different player last year, and I think it took, much like Donovan Raiola, it took fans a long time to sort of come around to the idea of like, oh, this is going well. Like this is, or I'm not noticing it anyway. And they changed the look of that a little bit last year. So it's always going to be about development on the offensive line. Nebraska's not going to be a place where they're going to have 5-star recruits across the offensive line and they play early. That's not a great formula anyway. So they're going to have to develop them. And I feel like they're on a really, really good track there with a good combination of guys who have been around for a long time and young guys that they've handpicked themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get to Bryce Benhart and some of those other Nebraska offensive linemen in the next segment. Before that, please subscribe to us on all of the audio platforms. Follow us on Twitter at LockedOnNEB. Send us an email at LockedOnNEB@gmail.com. If you're not watching us on YouTube, give that a shot. We are on YouTube every day. So after the break, we will be back, and we're going to talk about some of those Nebraska offensive linemen that Donovan Raiola has had the opportunity to coach. Connor, have you ever had a frustrating experience buying tickets to a Major League Baseball game? That's a rhetorical question. I think we all have.
Yes.
As you know, the Kansas City Royals, they're playing some beautiful baseball this spring. We're just going to spend all of our ad read time talking about the Kansas City Royals and hope that maybe our sponsors don't notice. This could be our way of actually having the podcast that I think we would like to have, is just talk about the Royals when they're way above 500. Never mind the fact that they might soon be the Nashville Royals, but right now everything's great in Kansas City. I'm excited to get down to the K, maybe as soon as this month, to watch the Royals play some ball, and it's going to be a better experience because of Game Time. Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of MLB. It makes tickets getting easier and faster for the fans. Prices on Game Time, the Game Time app, go down the closer it gets to first pitch. You got all-in pricing, no fees at checkouts, deals for specific zones in the stadium, flexible customer service. It's all there. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Game Time app. You can create an account and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEG. Check it out at gametime.co and on the Game Time app today. Lowest price guaranteed.
All right, welcome back. If you're watching Fox Sports, ESPN, the chit chat shows all day long, and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. All free, 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. We're everywhere. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That's your team every day.
Okay. Hey, before we get to the meat of segment 2, how you doing, man? I mean, things going well. How's your week going? All good. You get to watch the Royals yesterday?
Tonight so I have a thing with the Royals where, like, I haven't been around very much over the last couple of weeks, so I haven't and I cut the cord this off season, so I haven't figured out the right way to watch them yet, but that's something I got to work on this weekend. And so tonight I am out at Warner Park doing one of my various other jobs for the first time this year.
Storm Chasers.
Yeah, yes. So I do some emceeing for the Omaha Storm Chasers, which is the AAA. Like, I basically only want to do it because it's close proximity to the Royals as we could get, I think, around here. But
you're wearing the jersey. If you're watching us on YouTube, Connor's got the jersey on. He's repping the Storm Chasers. All right, I like it, man.
That's right, and it's gonna be in the mid 80s or something like that this weekend, apparently. So I'll be out at the ballpark all weekend.
Watch out for the wind tonight. I'm coaching baseball tonight. I was coaching baseball last night. Last night was good. Tonight, I'm a little concerned because they're saying 50-mile-an-hour winds in the Omaha area. So not real thrilled about the idea of that. Can we just get past this and get to like June?
It's not so much the cold, it's the wind, as all the Midwesterners say. I'm included in that, by the way.
Yeah. Well, we talked about Donovan Raiola, and now I want to get to some of those players he's coaching. So I had a discussion with some of the other writers around Nebraska football this week, and we were talking about who the Huskers might take to Indianapolis in July for Big Ten Media Days. You and I will get more into that when we get to July. I'm sure we'll incessantly talk about that event like it's the most important thing that is happening in the world. And then the day that we leave Indy, we're going to forget everything that happened there. But for now, it looks like Nebraska might take an offensive lineman to that big presentation, because you look around the offense and they're not going to take a freshman quarterback. Maybe a tight end. Probably not a running back with kind of the state of that room, the uncertainty in that room. So who do you take on the offensive line? And, along with that, I'll ask you, you mentioned Bryce Benhart in the last segment. Who has you feeling the most optimistic about Nebraska among the guys up front right now here in April?
That's a good one. Benhart with his improvement last year. I love the idea that you have a position of a guy who was good last year and you didn't really have to worry about it. And then he gets to come back for another year, and that guy would be Ben Scott along this offensive line. So that's pretty exciting to me. Like what you're, I think we carried away at some of the, especially the skill position spots where it's like, yeah, check out these wide receivers and they're new and they're explosive. Like all I want on the offensive line is consistency. Just be good for the entire season and play all the time. Like that's really all I want from you. And Ben Scott was that guy last year for Nebraska. So that like it doesn't sound exciting, Mitch, but it excites me in a way. And then you bring back a slew of other guys on that line too, and a couple new pieces as well.
I was a little surprised that Ben Scott came back. To be totally honest, yeah. When he made that announcement, I think they were in the sleep pods at the new facility. And maybe that's why he's coming back, because of the sleep pods. But he was with Isaac Gifford, and they did a little video. I honestly, I thought, wow, I didn't expect that. I thought Bryce Benhart had done enough last season. He had put enough on tape to impress scouts to the point where he would get drafted. I think he would have been drafted in this spring if he had left for the NFL. And I don't know that Nebraska's I'm talking about Benhart. Sorry.
Oh, you're talking about Benhart. Okay.
I'm talking about Benhart at right tackle. I think he's an NFL right tackle, and I'm a little bit surprised that he came back. If I said Scott, I'm sorry, but I meant Benhart. He's the one who did the video with Gifford. Scott too, to some degree, and maybe more so with him, because he was just at Nebraska for 1 year. And you wonder, now he's got ties to the state, but you wonder about his commitment. And if he just looked at it like, okay, I'm going to use this place as a stepping stone to get to the NFL. I've done what I needed to do in 1 year as a center in the Big Ten. Now let's go make some money. But they're both back. And Nebraska has Teddy Prohaska, who's finally going through a spring practice, being healthy, knock on wood.
Let's stop on Teddy for a second, because that's, that is such an interesting piece where, now it's been injuries for the last couple years, bringing him back too soon. And I think putting way too much on his shoulders, like, it'll be nice for him to be in a position where, yes, I do think they need him. Like he's kind of a wild card in that regard. Like they need him to be good and productive along the offensive line. But if they don't, then you do have some younger guys who seemingly their development is coming along really well. And I do think that's like a part of the equation with Teddy Prohaska. Like I want it to be really natural for him. And it just hasn't seemed natural for him over his first couple years in college.
Yeah, the injuries they've messed everything up. It's been disjointed. But it's looking on track. And Teddy's at a good playing weight for him. It's never been an issue of him being too big, but he's like 6'10" and could probably play at 330, 340 pounds and not have any issues. And he's down around 305, 310 this spring. That was a decision that he made with Nebraska's strength staff, with Nebraska's nutrition staff, with the offensive line coaches, to be able to be more mobile, so that when Nebraska's playing at USC in October, or playing that game's in November, or playing at Ohio State in October, and those teams have 4- and 5-star defensive ends, that Teddy Prohaska is able to get out and get in front of those guys, or at least give himself the best chance to get in front of those guys. He could be 330 pounds and probably do his job against most of Nebraska's schedule, but he wants to be able to do it against Oregon. He wants to be able to do it in a bowl game against a great team. Maybe Colorado brings in a 5-star defensive end among its transfer portal haul this offseason, and there you are in week 2 matched up against that guy. You don't want it to be a mismatch if you're Teddy Prohaska. So I applaud him for trying to find the way, even if it's uncomfortable I think it's hard when you're 6'10", 6'11", to keep your weight down like that as an offensive lineman. And there's a lot of muscle on his body, but he's putting in the work. And then at guard, they've got Micah Mazuka, who's a seasoned guy as a transfer from Florida, and Justin Evans Jenkins. So there's not really like an apparent weak spot among that group up front.
Let me ask you about the conversation surrounding Mazuka right now, because he gets asked about quite a bit, and the line that we've gotten from Rhule a couple times now has been, "Hey, there's a standard here, and he's got to meet it." And it's pretty short usually. That's sort of disconcerting, I think, early. I don't know that it's a bad thing overall for the team, but for him, it'll be interesting to see how he adjusts over the next couple months, because I think the expectation was when they took him that he slots into playing time along that offensive line right away.
Yeah, I think this is entirely about getting the transfers to understand that Nebraska is holding them to a higher standard, and it's not good enough just to go out and be a starting level offensive lineman or a starting level corner or a starting level linebacker in the Big Ten. That there's a belief and an understanding and an expectation at Nebraska that they want these guys to do this every day. And they don't care if it's January, February. They want them all in on the program. And Matt Rhule may be different in the way that he runs his program than some other guys. I think there are probably coaches out there who are entirely concerned about how they perform in September on Saturdays, and they can kind of give a what about the way that things are going at other times of the year. That's not Rhule. Of course, he wants to win. He knows the bottom line, but he wants his players to be all in, and he believes that by being all in January and February, you are not only doing yourself a service, but you're helping your teammates get to the place where they need to be. And when there's a lot of ground to be made up in a program, in building a culture that embraces winning, I do believe that it takes more than those 12 or 13 weekends on the year to get that done.
Yeah,
so that's where they're at with Mazuka. I think that's where they're at with a couple of their transfers. Stephon Thompson, the linebacker out of Syracuse, they need him to fully embrace Nebraska football.
It's not that way with Jamal Banks, though.
No.
That is not the line we hear with Jamal Banks. So yeah.
No, they love what he brings, and he upped the level. He upped the level of intensity and energy and kind of off-season cheerleader role from what Nebraska had in year one under Rhule.
And we got to take a break here, but like I think I talked to you about this before. I actually kind of like hearing that stuff. I think it means I think it's a good thing overall for the team. That, I mean, in the past, it's been the transfers have come in and Nebraska needs them so badly, and there's this pressure that gets put on them, and it's like, all right, these guys are our best players automatically. I love the idea that those guys are coming in, and you might look at them and what they've done in the past, and you might slate them for playing time or slate them to start, and it's difficult for them at first, or they hold them to a different standard. I like that. I think that's a good sign overall for the health of the program, for the culture of the program at Nebraska, and for the talent level of the program in Nebraska. So generally, I think it's a good thing, and I think he'll get adjusted to as we get closer to the fall.
Yeah, it's again kind of going back to the long game that we talked about with the Raiola crew earlier. This is the long game, just with the team in general. So, yeah, good stuff. Hey, after the break, we're going to talk some Big Ten baseball, Nebraska baseball, heading into a series at Rutgers this weekend.
Hey, playoffs are right around the corner in the NBA and in the NHL. Baseball is, of course, in full swing, as we have mentioned a couple times throughout the pod today. And FanDuel is your place to bet on everything under the sun. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. I will repeat that, $150, win or lose. Bet on everything in those playoffs, NBA, NHL. You can bet who's going to win the championship in both of those sports. Daily home run bettors, daily hit bettors, Bobby Witt Jr. to get 3 hits in a night, whatever you would like to do, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Head to FanDuel.com/locked on and make your first bet an automatic win. That is with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so let's talk some baseball. Let's get hooked up here because they've been a top 25
go back to the Royals
team. Not that kind of baseball. Let's go Scarlet and Cream baseball. It's been a pretty solid team all year. Will Bolt's got a good group in front of them, I think, and we saw a projection, Mitch, a week or two ago that had them hosting a regional. We'll see how that is. I'm not sure if that is likely at this point, but it's definitely a team that has postseason aspirations. I'll start with this for them as they head to Rutgers this weekend. Rutgers, by the way, is like a top 50-ish RPI team, so it's not an, it's a relatively important series for Nebraska to go and take it on the road. I think the difference this year, among many things, is you got a Friday night starter. You got Brett Sears, who's got some awards coming his way and midseason awards and stuff like that. I've been waiting for Nebraska to have a Friday night starter that you can depend on and that could give you 6-7 innings for a long time. It's the difference between good and bad teams in college baseball, I think, a lot of the times. And so that's I mean, you've checked off a lot of boxes when you just have that, and they have that this year.
Yeah, he's 6-0. So he's I think he's worth the price of admission, and Huskers are on the road this weekend. So I don't know that Nebraska fans are going to be caravanning out to Piscataway to see Brett Sears take the hill on Friday night, but they'll be back in Lincoln soon enough. And he's a guy who's worth going to see in the sense, similar to what we had in like the heyday of Nebraska baseball. I mean, this is he's having like a Shane Comine, Johnny Dorn, Aaron Marsden
nice
kind of season. Yeah, I'm digging it. I covered those teams, man. I was there.
Everybody goes Comine, and you dropped an Aaron Marsden in there. I love that.
I just kept on going right down the line. I'm going to just continue naming Nebraska aces. I actually can't do that. My time with them.
Will you go Jabba next or Jabba?
Jabba. Yeah, we can't forget about Jabba. Okay. Jabba was pretty good on Friday night. I recall watching Jabba pitch on a Friday night against Max Scherzer, a name that people may know, even if they're not fans of Nebraska baseball. Those two had a couple of duels in Jabba's years at Nebraska that were fun to watch. And Brett Sears is like seemingly in that mold for Nebraska this year. So go see him. I will say this, and this is in response to your statement about how Nebraska was projected to host a regional a couple of weeks ago. This is kind of a danger zone, I think, that the Huskers are in, because they're kind of in this April lull, I would say, where they're maybe not playing their best ball of the year. So they lost a couple of Tuesdays ago at Creighton, couldn't come back from an early deficit. And they took 2 or 3 against Ohio State. Okay, that's good. And then they went down to Lawrence this week and lost 13-11 at Kansas. And Kansas is not like an upper half of the Big 12 team. So right now you've lost 3 out of your last 5, which in baseball that happens. And if you're in the Big 12 or you're in the SEC, you don't even think twice about it. But if you're in the Big 10 and you've lost 3 out of 5 in a couple of midweek games, I think you start to get worried. If you're Nebraska, you start to think, hey, is this going in the direction that it went last year? So that for me, this Rutgers series, and it's a tough one because it's on the road against an upper part of the Big 10 team. It's pretty important. I think they need to play well and keep the momentum going.
Midweek baseball, Mitch, it's hard. It's really hard. I say that because I've seen a lot of midweek baseball games, both this year and for a long time. And especially for the Northern teams who don't have the type of pitching depth. Like, it's not like they have some freshman who's, a 5-star and he's going to get, drafted next year, but they want to get him some innings on a Tuesday against Louisiana, Tech or something like that. Like, they don't have that. So you're trying to piece it together and save your weekend arms at the same time. So it's hard. It's really hard to win in the midweek. And the system is set up where, the teams that you're playing in the midweek aren't going to necessarily have the best RPIs in the world. So if you lose them, it's really detrimental to what you do. So I wouldn't read into it a whole lot, what happens on Tuesday nights for Nebraska. With that being said, they can be damaging to a resume. Like you said,
yeah.
It's hard to swallow some of those sometimes. So they're going to have to find a way and grind them out.
That's in part what sunk Nebraska last year. So I know there are some big games coming up in the midweek, and in some ways, those midweek games, they become equally as important as conference games, just because of, as you mentioned, the NCAA regional resume that you need to produce if you're a Big Ten team. You can't rely on, being just above 500 in the conference to get in. It's a different ball game than what Will Bolt played and what Rob Childress that Nebraska's revered pitching coach has coached for the majority of his career. So, all right, with that, we're out of here on a Thursday. We'll be back on Friday to react to all that happened after practice on Thursday in Lincoln with Donovan Raiola. Matt Rhule is up to speak on Thursday too. So lots of content coming at you. Thanks for being here today.
All right, one more reminder. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today, here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, like us, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app.